writer. I know dialogue.
That's a fountain of conversation, man. That's a geyser.
Interesting.
Interesting.
Yes, provocative.
Welcome back to Booked on Rock, the podcast for those about to read and rock. I'm Eric Senich. This is the first of a new series called The Dialogue, a chill and chat with authors, fellow podcasters, listeners of the show. And for this first edition, I have Greg Renoff, who is the author of Van Halen Rising, How a Southern California Backyard Party Band Saved Heavy Metal, and Ted Templeman, A Platinum Producer's Life in Music. This week, both David Lee Roth and Sammy Hagar celebrate birthdays. Greg is here to talk about Dave and Sammy then, right now, and in the future. To hear the songs Greg and I talk about in this interview, just head over to the show notes page. Greg, how you doing, man? Thanks for being on the podcast, and it's great to talk to you again.
Great to talk to you, Eric. Always my pleasure. Looking forward to the conversation.
So this week, Sammy Hagar and David Lee Roth celebrate their birthdays. Dave turned 68 on October 10th. Sammy turned 75 on October 13th. I believe I got the math right, and I think it's safe to say they don't get together every year to celebrate.
That's what I was going to ask. You're going to tell me there was a surprise birthday party for both of them. They were both tricked into being in the same room.
Yeah. So, yeah, we saw what happened during their O2 tour.
Yeah.
Like Sammy said, like oil and water.
Right.
But, I'm curious, how far does this go back? I know Sammy was on Dave's radar pretty early. There's the story of Eddie trying to introduce Dave to Sammy backstage at a festival in California, and that's September 78, and Dave just blew him off like, yeah.
Right.
You talked with Ted Templeman about the early days when Ted was considering bringing in Sammy to sing for Van Halen early on, since he produced that first Montrose record, which is a classic. And I've always wondered when Dave found out about that. Did Ted ever say anything about that? Was Dave aware that there were talks of bringing Sammy in that early? Because obviously he knows now, I'm sure. But back in those days, did he know?
Yeah. So I think, I've heard a lot of people talking about this, and I can only say what Ted told me. And Ted was pretty consistent with his story about this, which was that when he first saw Van Halen, he liked the songs, liked the band, thought they were a good band, loved Eddie Van Halen, thought there were issues with the band in terms of him thinking about what it would be like to record this band. But he was all about he's like, I want the band for Ed, really, and I'll figure out all the other things. They did the demo, which would have been in April 77. So they signed in March, and February, March, they get the deal with Warner Brothers. They lock that up, and then he takes them to the studio in April, and they do this demo. And from what Ted told me, that he was sitting there in the studio recording them and then listening back to the demo, and he was just very concerned, thinking, I don't know if this is going to work, because I don't think the singer is good enough to be able to pull it off, basically, to make the album acceptable, basically, in Ted's mind. So that's when Ted started mulling over, the way Ted told it, mulling over this idea of maybe we need a different singer. He said that he kept that very close to the vest. He had talked to me about that. He had mentioned it to Don a couple of times. Don Lanty, obviously his very close friend and his engineer, that they'd I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't have to figure this out. But Ted always told me, I was like, did you tell the guys in the band? He goes no, never. He's like, never. Did you tell Dave? He goes, no way. I never told any of those guys. For this, it would make sense, because obviously that could poison the relationship with Dave. Number one, it could poison the relationship with Ted and Dave. It could poison, if they found out, it could poison the relationship between the band guys in the band and Dave, or it could just wreck the entire, thing with Ted, where they may have just banded together and been like, you're you don't have us in your best interest. We think Dave's a good enough singer, and we have a problem with you now. So Ted was always consistent. He never told those guys. Now it's clear by some point along the line, those guys found out. Now, is it possible that Ted is forgetting he told somebody? I believe Ted when he said he never told anyone else in the band. Is it possible he told someone else up at Warner Brothers headquarters? I think it's possible that maybe he said it to one of the other executives, like, I've got this problem I'm trying to work through. I don't know if the singer's going to be able to do it or not. And then Dave found out another way. It's possible. It is interesting that you bring up about this, because if you look back at some interviews in Kerrang magazine, back in 1981, there are actually those guys are taking shots at each other. It's very strange. You're just this is 4 years later, right? Dave is out, Sammy joins, and I won't go into some stuff that's pretty politically incorrect to say now, but basically there's questionings about their romantic, who they would like to go on a date with. It just is all this stuff back and forth, and they're kind of taking shots at each other. There was just this, kind of out of nowhere stuff that would come up in interviews, and the interviewer would say, I read an interview that you did with Sounds Magazine, and you mentioned you didn't like David Lee Roth, and then Sammy would say something, and then they'd be back. It's just back and forth. These guys in the press,
and it's before Sammy's in the band, so you conclude that something's going on, something's behind this animosity.
I can only tell you what Ted told me. I believe that Ted was telling me, being transparent, telling me the truth. I don't think he was like holding back a story from me. It's 40 years ago. I don't think it's any that big of a deal, but it would make sense to think that he wouldn't want those guys to know, obviously, because at the end of the day, obviously he figured out how to make it work with Dave, and it worked out wildly successful. So, it would make sense that he wouldn't want to poison the well, so to speak, with those guys by sort of saying, I don't think your singer's good enough. And then, he is good enough. And then, suddenly there's like this doubt, at least that in the band, about the singer or whatever. So that's what he always told me. But the guys in Van Halen did know, they did learn. And so, however, that information, did Ted tell them later? I don't know. Like, did Ted tell them like when they were splitting with, he never told me that, but I'm just speculating. Maybe did he tell them in 1980 relations between Ted and the band were not great in 1985? As I think most people know, there was definitely like a tension between them after the making in 1984. Did Ted blurt it out to those guys and say, like, I thought about Sammy in 1977, and I think it wasn't in support of it then at the end of the day, and you guys will be making a mistake if you kick Dave out of the band. I have no idea if he like blurted it out or something then, or they knew earlier, but the guys in Van Halen definitely knew by the time Sammy was joining, I think, or somewhere soon after that, around that time, that Sammy had been considered as a singer for Van Halen. And the last thing I'd say about that, to kind of bring it full circle, was that it wasn't like there was some sort of like master plan inside of Warner Brothers to do this. It was like Ted mulling this over and like mentioning it maybe to Don, and like, again, maybe he mentioned it to somebody else, but he certainly always said to me, I never told the guys in the band, never.
Well, and that's what we were talking a little bit before we started recording about this idea that maybe Ted had something to do with Sammy joining in 85, that the whole story with Claudio, that they shared the same mechanic, and Claudio facilitated this call, and that maybe that wasn't it. Maybe it was Ted who said, hey, never.
I don't. I mean, the best that I know, Ted never told me that. And if folks who have read the book or haven't read the book, Ted was always very adamant about that. He never wanted, again, when I first started talking to him about this stuff in detail, I was actually very shocked that he said that. It's like, I never wanted Sammy in the band, because I guess before I ever spoke to Ted Templeman some years back, I would have said, well, at the end of the day, he probably, Dave quits, you got a solo artist, and plus you got a guy who you already, know is a great singer. You already did albums. You did 2 albums with him with Warner Brothers, and you did a solo album with him with VOA. So obviously it's like a win-win. I guess Sammy's a great guy, get him in the band. But Ted was like, no, I didn't want Sammy in the band, because he believed in sort of the pureness of the original Van Halen, or I don't know how you want to put it, but Ted had, if you read the book, Ted has this sort of his belief that it would change the original character of the band, which is, he didn't say this, but it'd be like putting someone else in place of Robert Plant and Led Zeppelin, which isn't maybe a perfectly fair analogy to Dave or whatever, but that's basically what, you can't have the Who without Roger Daltrey. I think that's what Ted would kind of say, like, exactly, like, you can't, it's not the same thing. It's certainly, you can call it the Who, but it's not the same anymore. You don't have Roger Daltrey anymore. So, I mean, he definitely angered those guys. The brothers were extremely angry that Ted, and Sammy was too, that he didn't basically back it to the hilt that those guys should join, Sammy should join Van Halen. But what I would say is that, I've never heard anything from Ted other than that. I mean, I don't even know if Ted ever told me like, oh, Claudio told me. I don't know if he remembered that, or that just never kind of came up. I may have mentioned that to him, but he never volunteered that, like, yes, Claudio was the guy who introduced him. But I've always ever heard in every interview that it was Claudio. And Ted was never going to be calling up Eddie and be like, no, what you should do is kick Dave out and get Sammy in the band.
Well, we're around the same age. I was born in 1972. When I became a fan of Van Halen, Sammy was in the band. And I only knew of him from seeing the I Can't Drive 55 video. Honestly, I knew nothing about Montrose. When I went into his back catalog, there were definitely songs I recognized, like Your Love Is Driving Me Crazy, but I didn't even know that was a Sammy song. I was just a kid.
Right. Sure.
When did you first discover Sammy, and how much of his pre-Van Halen days had you heard?
I don't think I had heard any of the Montrose record before I heard VOA. I'm like 99.9% sure I had it. Because, again, the thing that's interesting is like Montrose debut is one of those things that has ended up selling over 1 million copies by the 80s, but it basically bombed in 73 when it came out. It failed, not like it like completely tanked, but it never got above like 110 or something. And they never had a hit single. but it was one of these bands that, like, from anyone I ever talked to, one of these albums that you talked to who was a 70s rock musician who was serious about it, or like was a rock fan, people knew about that album. They were like, oh, that's a great album. And so it just sort of steadily sold and sold and sold. But my point is, it never got played on the radio. Like, you never heard Rock Candy or any of the other songs that were, sort of like Space Station Number 5. You never would hear that stuff on the radio. Never.
No singles. Like Ted
no,
said,
or
no singles.
Right,
we need
right,
a single.
no singles. Right. And so the thing I would have heard first would have been probably the song Heavy Metal, probably. I remember hearing that, Sammy's song. And then obviously the big one would have been VOA. I did not know, I don't think, I'm quite sure I did not know that Rick Springfield's big hit with Sammy's song was a Sammy song. I didn't know that. And I certainly had never heard the Sammy song. That would have been that probably would have been the first Sammy song I ever heard. It would have been I've Done Everything for You, which the Springfield's version of it, but probably the Heavy Metal. I think probably I remember seeing that like on like Night Flight or something like that, probably. And they that song did get some airplay, as I recall. But yeah, VOA, obviously that would have been the big sort of like, oh, right. This is Sammy Hagar. This is the guy who wears the jumpsuits and drives the Ferraris and all that stuff. And Claudio's in that video.
Yeah, he is
so entertaining too. Claudio's in the video.
What is interesting is we know Eddie was a fan of Montrose, and I love that connection with Make It Last and Cabo Wabo. That was Ed having some fun doing a little old school Montrose riff there. So if you listen to Make It Last, you say, oh, okay, I get it.
And it's interesting too. That's the one song that has sort of made it out of sort of the bootleg world. That was the one Montrose song. There were other, you would think they probably did other Montrose songs. They probably did Rock Candy and some other songs, but the only one we have is a Van Halen doing a Montrose song from the club days is the Make It Last. Yeah, from the last song on the record.
Now, did you go back and discover Sammy's body of work because of Van Halen? That's what I did. And then after he left Van Halen, I even did more so because I I'm now on board with Sammy. So let's see what he's got. And then I go back to Montrose and back to his early solo stuff. And it's like, this is good stuff. Some of it's not so good.
Yeah.
Some of it's really good. Yeah.
Yeah, I never really got. I mean, it's really kind of funny. I had a friend in high school, still a very good friend of mine, who was like a Sammy Hagar solo super fan, even before Van Halen. And he would like play this stuff for me, like Cruising and Boozing and all this stuff. And I never quite could
Plain Jane.
like all that. I never could. Right. I never could quite like fully take the leap. There are certain songs Three Lock Box and these other songs, sort of the leading edge of Sammy's best stuff I could get into, but I was not a guy who was going to like throw in like, some of the deeper Sammy albums from the 70s. But yeah, he was on Capitol, and then he was on Geffen, and Sammy talks about this at great length in his book, obviously, but he played the Days on the Green and had some, he was on these, obviously on the bill with Van Halen more than once in 78. So he had elevated himself from a stadium act. And so, being a guy who basically got fired, Ronnie Montrose broke up Montrose and just, to get rid of like all the guys in the band. He's like, we're breaking up. And then he basically reformulated Montrose with basically, like, I don't know if it was a totally different lineup, but like he basically just was like, we're breaking up. And from what Sammy says, like 2 weeks later, it's like Montrose is making a new record, but he basically fired Sammy to get onto the next thing. But,
here's another mind blow, Greg. I was just on a podcast where one of the co-guests on there brought up something that I never made the connection on. So Three Lock Box, you mentioned. The riff to Three Lock Box, the riff to Mean Street.
Okay. I'm going to check that out. I have a friend who I'll keep him mysterious who it is, but he's a musician who's made a bunch of albums and has been in some bands that you would recognize. But we always do this like back and forth with riffs, and he's like, he's like, oh yeah. This is like, oh yeah. It's like sort of like what birthed this. But so Three Lock Box and Mean Street. Okay.
All right. I'm gonna start doing that all day. People are like,
don't tell Sammy. Don't tell Sammy. Can we taking credit?
I believe we
Blabbermouth.
Yeah.
Blabbermouth. Mean Street is the Sammy Hagar riff. Hagar.
I believe we both became fans of Van Halen around the 1984 era from just listening to some of the interviews, right? Yep. I still remember seeing the video for Jump, and I was just blown away. 12 years old. Like, what is this guy doing? Dave, what is he doing in that video? What was your first impression of Dave?
I just the song sort of, I am pretty sure I would have seen the video before hearing the radio. It's so hard to remember, right? I wasn't driving at the time, and so probably was more likely I would have listened to it on MTV and heard it. But yeah, I mean, it's just the video was so engaging. I love the song so much, and it's interesting too because then I got to 45, and I don't remember why I didn't buy the album first. Maybe I just didn't have enough money that day. It wasn't like we were poor and I couldn't like scrape up enough money to get an album. I don't want to paint the wrong picture here, but like whatever, I bought the 45. Maybe I only had like $3 with me when I pulled them. I didn't even have a wallet at the time. So I pulled the change, I dumped it on the counter, buy the 45 for $1.95 or whatever it was. But House of Pain, right? Then I was like, whoa,
yeah.
That was sort of like my real. I sort of had a little bit of been a little bit introduced to what heavy rock was or whatever from an uncle of mine who would talk about Zeppelin and basically the Who and Mountain. And he sort of played some of that stuff for me and talked to me about it, but I hadn't really become like into it, sort of like, but this was like really like the gateway drug was House of Pain. As much as Jump, like that was like, wow, the guitar playing was so incredible. And then it was just, off to the races for me with Van Halen.
When did you first visually get that feeling that you get from watching Dave doing his stuff, just the kicks and the splits? And I mean, because that's, right. Nobody, he's like the Michael Jordan of rock and roll, Right. Nobody could do that.
Well, I mean, I think the thing is like, it's really interesting. It's like, you see the video and you see all these jumps, but I had when I got to see the 84 tour, I don't think I'm almost positive at that point I hadn't seen like the Fair Warning videos, or maybe I probably had seen Pretty Woman, but then, sort of, you don't know what to expect from a Van Halen concert, right? And you sort of go there and it's just sort of was so loud and so overwhelming. And then Roth immediately does the split off the drum riser.
With Unchained.
And the lights are on, right? The crowd goes crazy. God. And like, it's just like, that was just, I was just
sick.
I mean, the thing that's really funny is when I think back, is that the first like big rock concert I ever saw was actually the Go-Go's. My sister was a Go-Go's fan. She's younger than me. And, we had my uncle, a different uncle, who worked in New York City and was always this guy who could get tickets or whatever. He just like got tickets and was like, it was like a Friday night and my sister was like 11, right? 11. And so there were, I don't remember, there was enough tickets. He had gotten 8 tickets or something like that. And so we all went, my cousins went, we went and we sat way up in Madison Square Garden. And it was actually pretty amazing to see this. The garden was packed. The Go-Go's were huge. Everyone, the girls were dancing. It was like, probably like 70% girls in the crowd. It was like definitely like, whoa, this is kind of cool for like a 13-year-old kid or whatever I was.
Yeah.
But then you go saw Van Halen, and this isn't all a shot at the Go-Go's. I'm just saying when you go to see Van Halen, like Roth was like cursing and like drinking whiskey, and it was like much more of like, the girls in the Go-Go's were not like up there like, they weren't, that wasn't their shtick, right? They were doing something different, and it was the crowd was into it, and it was a great fun, definitely a great fun concert, and I'm glad I saw it. But like the whole different, like, this is like rebellious rock and roll, right? It was like, it's like a whole different thing. Like, I just remember sitting there in the crowd or whatever, standing there, I was like, 14-year-old kid, I'm like a sophomore in high school, or whatever. And it's like, I guess it was I was still I was a freshman, right? I was a freshman in high school. So it was the spring of my freshman year, and it was like F-bombing this and F and mother effing this. And like, I was like, you can say that and not get arrested? You know, one of these things, like, you just don't quite, you're like, like, you're just like, oh my, you can do anything.
Be honest, were you like I did, on your school books?
Perfecting
the logo. It's not even on all sides. I got to try it again.
I haven't told this story before. This is actually really funny. So I haven't told this story before ever. So, I started getting into Van Halen, and like, for whatever it's worth, there was a guy who was older who had like the Eddie Van Halen haircut. And actually, I didn't realize at the time, but he like wore parachute pants. Like, he was basically like imitating Eddie Van Halen. Like, that was his thing. Like, he didn't I don't think he played guitar, but that was like, he was taking his fashion cues from Eddie Van Halen. So like, I remember this one time, like, it was one of those things where he was like a senior and I was a sophomore, and he was like, so you like Van Halen? And he wasn't like bullying me, but he was just sort of like, like, so you like Van Halen, huh? I'm like, yeah. He's like, what albums do you have? And I was like, 1984, and I don't know, whatever, maybe I Diver Down, or maybe I had like Van Halen 2, or I had 2 albums, or maybe I had 3, I don't know. And he was like, you heard Fair Warning yet? And I'm like, I don't think so. And I was like, he's like, oh yeah, there's a song Unchained. Do you know that song? And I was like, probably like, I've seen the video on MTV, I think. And he's like, let me tell you something, kid. He's like, like that kind of thing. It's like, when they say thin red line, I'm like, I guess. He's like, that's about when you take a girl's virginity. Like, and he was like 100% serious. He was like, just letting you in on something. Like, like, it was like the older Van Halen fan, like, kind of like cutting me on the real truth. And I was like, whoa, because I believed it. I was like, whoa.
That's so great. I got to tell you, there's a funny one from 1989. This is how obsessed I was with not just Van Halen, but Dave. And I remember the MTV Video Awards, they kept promoting there's a big surprise, a big guest surprise appearance.
Right.
And in my Van Halen obsessed mind, I kept thinking, oh my God, it's going to be Dave with Van Halen. You know, and I waited and I tuned in. And it was
the VCR program.
Yeah. And it was Tom Petty with Guns N' Roses. That's what do you remember that? I don't know if you remember, but
I don't remember that. I
was like, motherfucker. But then when it happened in 96, though, that was the feeling. It was like, oh my God, Dave's
right. I'll tell you. So you know, I have this like sick obsession with old rock magazines from the 80s, right? So you like get these I get these magazines on eBay or whatever, you know, I'm like spend my $8 and $4 for shipping, get this magazine and I'm reading it. And it's always like you realize like, you know, like everything is like came like so the news, you know, MTV at least gave you like relatively updated news, but like everything else you as magazines was like 3 months later, like you'd read about like you're like, what did I miss? You're like, you know, that would be the type of thing I'd be like, that happened? Like I didn't even know that happened, right? You're saying like you go on Twitter and like you'd see it, like you just be like, I didn't even know Tom Petty came out with Guns N' Roses. Like if you didn't know about it, like, but he like, you know, like 6 months later, you're like, oh, I guess I missed that. I'll never see that now that I know that from the magazine. Man.
Such a different, yeah. Once you heard that MTV sound, that sound with the typewriter logo, you're like, okay, here we go. Both Dave and Sammy, as we know, have written books. You mentioned Sammy's, and anything that addressed the drama within Van Halen made headlines, got a lot of attention, sells books. But so here's my question to you: as an author, is it worth it? Like if an artist came to you with a book idea and they say, I just want to tell it all. I don't want to hold back. It's going to get ugly. How do you handle that kind of request? Do you do it? Do you say, well, I mean, what is it?
I think it would be, you know, if somebody wants it all out there, I think there's like, there's always this question of like, what's the motivation for doing that? I mean, again, it's like, yeah, you want to sell books, that's fine. But it's like, you want to basically burn down your ex-bandmate's house basically through this book or whatever. I just think sort of,
you're going to be connected to it, right? So then you got to think, do I want to be...
bit, right. I can only tell you like from my own experience, like with working with, you know, working on my own book, I was on the Van Halen Rising book. I was, you know, as a third party who was not privy to this stuff firsthand. It was not some sort of, you know, obviously not some sort of, it was like person who was there for any of that stuff. I was always really careful about thinking about like what to put in. And, you know, obviously there were some things you think long and hard about. The one thing that really I agonized over with Van Halen Rising was about the Eddie overdose story. And so, you know, the thing was for me was that he had talked about that in a number of like 2 or 3, you know, there wasn't like he went on every interview and talked about it, but there were a couple of radio interviews over the years where he talked about it. And so it's sort of a thing where you were like, okay, he had put it out there, and this is sort of context of what happened. People who saw him overdose, and kind of gives a little bit of context to like what had actually happened and how this early scare with drugs for him was actually like a super scary thing for him and the guys in the band and everyone who saw it happen. But, you know, in going on to like thinking about stuff like that, you think like, okay, you know, you don't want to do, I didn't, and I would think most people who write these books, you don't want to like harm the, you know, kind of harm the people that you're trying to write a book about. And I mean, like, since you want to be like, you know, you want to be truthful, but you don't want to like be malicious is what I'm trying to say. It's like, you don't want to go out of your way to be like, you know what, I'm going to err on the side of like putting stuff out there that is just sort of might be truthful, but it's actually kind of like nasty in tone and actually would, you know, someone would be sort of put off by that when it doesn't serve the story, right? That's the other thing too. It's just sort of like, oh, let's just pile all this extra crap in there just to make that. With the Ted book, you know, Ted and I were both of the same mind. I mean, it was never, I was always going to take my cues from Ted, but if Ted had been like, I want to settle a score with all these people, I would have been like, you sure you want to do that? I don't think we would want to do that. Like, I don't think we want to do that. And Ted was never into that. In fact, he was actually, and we both were very, I think, very much focused on the fact that from Ted's perspective, and I thought the same way, that he really admired the people he worked with, even though he had big disagreements with Sammy Hagar, Eddie Van Halen. Like, you know, there were all sorts of people he had moments where he did not get along with, or there was basically difficult relations with these individuals. He never wanted to basically make anyone reading his book think anything but that, you know, at the end, the big picture, I loved working with these artists. They were inspirational to me as a producer. I am very lucky to have worked with these people. You know, Ted would say like, I was like a mediocre, it's kind of setting himself short, but basically a mediocre musician in his mind compared to the people he worked with. And then I got the chance to produce these artists. It's just it's a great turn of fate for me. And I feel very fortunate. So he was always like, you know, look, I might've been like pissed off at these people, or there were things that had happened I could have put in a book. You know, we were always like, it just, yeah, it was just sort of like err on the side of like, yeah, so that nobody, he didn't want anyone to like, quote unquote, feel bad at reading the book, where it was like, tell the story, tell the general thread through it. You don't have to be like, oh yeah, then all this real nasty stuff happened between me and this person. Let me tell you how effed up this person was, or like, how it was all their fault, or they're just whatever they were doing. Like he didn't, but if someone came to me and, had that sort of agenda, I'd be probably pretty put off by that, just because it's like, yeah, you become party to it. And it's just, at this point in time, I mean, I think, I always, and the other thing just more generically is like, somebody said a long time ago, I don't know who it was, in an interview, like, you can't out dirt the dirt. Like,
right.
Even if you were like, let's bring all the sex, all the drugs, like you can't out dirt the dirt. Like there's no, like, you've reached, there's no, if you want that, you should read the dirt, because that's that classic in that genre. Right. And sort of like, just to sort of like, to try to like go down that road in any sort of way, with whether it be like being like super negative about ex-bandmates or stuff like that. I mean, if that's the story, that's the story, right? It's like, this band broke up and I have these things, that's fine, but it may not be the book that I would want to partner for. It's just not my,
Michael Anthony, I loved what he said. He was talking about on Mitchell Fawn and Jeremy White. He was a guest, and he said, I may write a book, but I'm just letting you know now, it ain't going to be that type of book. It's not going to have any dirt,
Of course not. Of course not. Right. Like,
that's so
wouldn't
cool.
we be like,
yeah, because he could easily
right. Wouldn't we
just
be like, what the hell's going on? If it was like, you kidnapped Michael Anthony, like, you blink twice, Mike, if you're being held hostage by your co-author, by your press, or whatever. It was like that, right? Of course not.
I mean,
right.
I don't think, even if he was out of work and flat broke, he wouldn't do it.
No.
It's a cash grab that he's just
high road. High road
he's
guy.
just been so cool.
And look, at the end of the day, I mean, to anyone out there, it's like, there's not that much cash to grab. Like, you're not like, to like basically be like, I'm going to burn down the reputation of people I work with, or burn down my own reputation by doing this. There's not that much more cash. You're not getting that much more cash. You know what I'm saying? It's like, it's not like everyone's like, oh, well, like, this is what I really needed to know about how this person was so messed up, or this person did this, or this person's horrible. I mean, it's just like, all of it comes out for free on the internet anyway. Like, immediately when the book comes out, like, all this, that stuff gets blabbermouth and stuff like that. So it's like, yeah, you might, see like a slight, but it's not like, like, I could be this rich, or I could be like on my yacht if I write the most nasty book I can write. So it's just, right.
Have there been any books on Van Halen that haven't been written yet? I mean, is there a book on the band that hasn't gone in an area of the band?
Oh, I think there's a lot.
The Sammy era?
I think there's a lot. I mean, there's been, I think there's I mean, for one book I would love to read is like, I'd love to read like the Gary Sharon story. Like, like basically like, I would like, obviously Gary's, as we all know, Gary's not the guy who's going to like tell those tales about, even like if they were like all like positive, he's probably not going to write a book, right? Probably not. But I would love to know like, right, like what was going on inside the band. There's, I don't know if anyone's ever been able to 100% verify this, but that Eddie played drums on a number of tracks on Van Halen 3, and there may have been some reason why Alex didn't play drums. I don't know if I'd never really quite been able to sort of figure out what was myth and what was truth about that. But supposedly that there was, Eddie played drums on it, and like what was like, I would love to know from him, like, you got Mike Post, you got Eddie Van Halen, you got the brothers, basically, like who was producing what did you see in terms of that dynamic? Because it'd be very interesting to hear how that all took shape. Was that like the most big ticket Van Halen story of all time? No, but that for something, that because, and to be frank about it, partially because Eddie sadly went into such a tailspin after that, it would be interesting to hear somebody who obviously had affection for Eddie and cared about him, like what did he see from the failure of Van Halen 3? How did he see that affecting Eddie? Like, how did Eddie deal with that? And how did Gary feel about that? Obviously, that the quote unquote failure of what gold or whatever, but like obviously, it didn't succeed in the marketplace like everybody had hoped.
And it came out during the internet, or the beginning of the explosion of the internet.
The very beginning of the internet.
Yeah, I don't think that helped. I don't know how much of it he saw, but it got pretty ugly. And once I heard that Alex played on some of the tracks, but not all, then I started listening to the songs again. I'm trying to figure out which ones, and I mean, I just guessed like Fire in the Hole maybe, but I know I've heard others say that, so it's interesting. And you don't hear the harmonies, you don't hear the Mike and Ed harmonies that much in there, and it's but again, having said all that, I'm always supportive of artists. So if they do it and it works, great. If they do it and it doesn't, great. That's just, they're artists. They just, I mean, even Dave did all that stuff he did with Your Filthy Little Mouth, and he just did different things. And they don't want to make the same album over.
No Holds Barbecue.
Yeah, No Holds Barbecue. Yeah, Dave. You know, it's
we need a book on. We need a frame by frame breakdown of No Holds Barbecue. We need like it's like Zapruder film, like frame this, every single second of the thing broken down. Like
you never know what Dave's going to do next. You talk about headlines, like misleading headlines and the internet and all that stuff. Did you hear Roger Waters say that he couldn't care less about AC/DC or Eddie Van Halen?
I saw the, like probably you do, and probably a lot of people do. If anyone who doesn't do this, if you're interested in Van Halen, you can set up a Google News alert search, or Google News alert, which will email you when the word Van Halen appears in a news article, or Eddie Van Halen or whatever, just permutation of that. And so I see this stuff, and I just I'm so like burned out. I'm like, I didn't even click. I didn't even click on it. I was like, it's fine. If he doesn't like it, it's fine. It's fine.
Well, that's
it's
exactly
fine.
where I was going with this now. But the funny thing is, something occurred to me. But I thought the same thing. I'm just like, who gives a shit? Because then if you read the whole quote from him, he's saying, I'm sure he's brilliant and a great guitar player and wonderful. It just doesn't interest me. So the headline doesn't really match. You got to read his whole quote. Okay. But then the funny thing was, then it occurred to me. I was like, wait a minute. Didn't Eddie play on one of Roger's songs? He played on Lost Boys Calling in 1999. Right. So Roger forgot that?
Well, I mean, that's actually interesting. I never, I didn't
there's
think
a
about
story,
that.
right?
And now, I wonder if like the producer brought Eddie in. I'm sure Roger called. I mean, I'm sure Roger called Eddie.
Well, that's
I'm
my
sure,
thought.
like, you're like Roger Waters. You think you're gonna make the call. You're not gonna have the producer call. Like I'm
He
calling
had
him
to
to get after
know.
Roger Waters. Eddie'd be like, put Roger on the phone. Whatever.
It was for a soundtrack. So I'm just thinking, okay, did Roger did they ask him to write a song, record his parts, and then he said, you guys do what you want? But he's got to know he's on his own track. Why?
Right.
I mean, why would Roger Waters just say, I don't care who you use as a guitarist? Right. I mean, hello.
I mean, look, it would be surprising. I mean, this is the thing too. It's sort of like there's this sort of reactivity that people have to this stuff. Like anyone, it's like tribal, right? You're like, I don't like Van Halen, and suddenly it's like, get the torches, we're gonna burn the witch or whatever. But it's like, if Roger Waters was like, I listen to Everybody Wants Some about once a week, it's a great song, I would have been like, what is going on here? Right? I would have been pretty shocked by that, right? So like, you don't expect someone like Roger Waters to be like into Van Halen. But yeah, it is a little strange for him to be like, Eddie was a nice guy. It didn't, for not to say like Eddie was a very nice guy. He played on my record.
Yeah.
I wasn't the biggest Van Halen fan, but he did a great solo.
It's weird. Yeah.
Well, Ozzy. Let's just keep going. Let's just scrap the rest of the interview. Let's keep going. So about everybody like is sending me this clip, and I don't mean like I'm happy people send me stuff. I like love it. Like on my DMs or like texting me, whatever. I'm this is what I do, right? This is like cling. What's this? Oh, Ozzy says that David Lee Roth has lost a couple of. That's
another one. That's another one. I'm just like, well, who cares?
Right, Sharon.
Yeah,
Sharon.
Yeah.
David Lee Roth is crazy, right?
I mean,
Ozzy.
Yeah. I mean, it's
exactly.
it's just, I don't know. It's just funny. It's like that. Do we really care? I mean, I just don't care. Like everybody's like, Dave's crazy and all that. I don't know. All I know is, he's just the greatest front man I've ever seen. So I don't care what he does.
Right. Yeah, it's just the whole, like, yeah, exactly. Like, it's just sort of like, someone sent me like the Spider-Man meme of like the two people pointing at each other, like, like the point where you're crazy, like pointing at each other. It's like, yeah, it's just like, but yeah, these interviews come out, and it's like, obviously it's just boiled down to the headline becomes something that someone said in absolute passing, and of course that's the like blabbermouth is like the classic for that, where it's like, it's like a 75-minute interview and one sentence becomes a headline. They're promoting, some bands promoting a record, and they say like, I don't like the Scorpions albums with, songs about whatever, like, about like in the zoo or something. I don't like the song The Zoo, and something that becomes a headline,
Okay.
Like the person said, like, instead of in passing something like, right. This is like the big whatever, just like the most trivial thing becomes the headline.
The Booked on Rock podcast will return after this. Don't miss an episode of the Booked on Rock podcast. Subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts, or just go to the Booked on Rock website, bookedonrock.com, to find a full listing of podcast platforms where you can subscribe and follow. That's bookedonrock.com. as for what's happening now with Dave and Sammy, so Sammy just put on the new album with a circle called Crazy Times. I like it. It's good stuff. I'm going to recommend 2120 and Father Time and the title track. Those three. Really good.
2120. That's a really catchy. That's a great riff. That's sort of like,
that's like early 80s.
The one I reacted to most, most positively out of the list. Like I was like, oh, I can get with this. This is good. Yeah.
So, but here's my question to you, because again, you know Ted, you interviewed him, you wrote the book with him. Sammy said he and producer David Cobb reached out to Ted to find out how to capture that classic sound of Michael Anthony's vocals from the early Van Halen albums. And I thought that was fascinating, in that Sammy said they couldn't figure out what they were doing wrong. They couldn't get it right. They had Mike do the vocals, and it's like, well, it's just still isn't it. So they called Ted. He's got the magic formula. What do you recall about Ted's time recording the classic Van Halen backing vocals and like the things he did in the studio?
Yeah, I suspect that there wasn't one magic bullet, that they did different things in different songs. So for instance, Ted sang on some of the stuff, right? Ted would come in and he would sometimes double Ed's voice. So that was one of the things that happened. Or they would have, from what I remember Ted saying, of course, don't quote me on this magic formula because I'm forgetting the recipe myself. It was sort of like that sometimes that Mike would sing one part of the harmony, and then Mike would sing with Ed on the other part of the harmony, and they'd build it up. Ted did tell me that Alex, maybe on Happy Trails or whatever, but he never sang. Like Alex was never a guy who was going to come out and speak like, we're doing background vocals. Alex was not a guy who would do that. Mike had a very, very powerful voice, as everybody knows, and Ted talked about that was one of the things, was that they wanted to balance out the voices. But he also talked about what a great singer. I think that was the quote that came out in Ultimate Classic Rock, that Ed had a really, really good singing voice. It was just one of the ones that wasn't as strong, as powerful as Sammy's. But Ted was a guy who had done stacked harmonies with the Doobie Brothers, with his band Harper's Bazaar. They did a lot of these sort of multi-part, 3-part harmonies, and so Ted was actually quite well versed in how to make that stuff sound like that. Yeah, Ted. I mean, I think it's interesting when I don't think Ted had not seen the story, and I told him about it. This is Sammy had come out and said this, and he's like, oh. He's like, yeah, he called me a few months ago, but I don't, whatever it wasn't like, okay, here's the thing, guys, you got to do. I think this Ted was like, told him like, oh, this is what we normally did or whatever. But I think Ted was pleased that it worked for those guys. But I don't think Ted felt like it was like some sort of like, like we're having a meeting, like get Dave Cobb on the line or something like that. We have to like go through this bit by bit.
Because I was just thinking, like, it was
just about
have
doubling
Mike
whatever
stand
it was,
at just a certain angle. Have him stand just.
No.
No, I was.
Yeah, no, I don't. I think it was just a matter of like, yeah, they just, they would definitely. I would just say that, like, from what I remember Ted telling me, there was not just like one like magic formula how they did it. Depending on what kind of sound they want. Like, like the harmonies on Mean Street, for example, would be different than Feel Your Love Tonight. So that's whatever they wanted to kind of get on tape. They were going to have these multi-part vocals blend together for the backgrounds, and then they would just sort of like figure out what worked.
What type of mic to use, where to have them stand.
I'm thinking all that. He may have told him that stuff. I mean, but he just goes like, "Oh yeah," he called me and I just kind of talked to him about what we would do, how we would double, Ed's vocal and like what Mike would do, and whatever. I think, but I don't think it was like. I think Dave Cobb. It wasn't like about that, and I suspect that, I think Sammy did Ted a solid. I mean, I think that was nice of him to say that, but I think
it's there.
Sort of like
you can hear it though.
It's interesting because the way Sammy phrased his answer, he almost made it sound like, I want the Running with the Devil background vocals. Like, he's like that hard car horn thing. And I'm thinking, does he mean like Running with the Devil? Like that song was kind of coming to mind for him. But like, like Black and Blue, there's all that stuff. Like obviously the stuff that they did with Don Landee, that was very much in that wheelhouse of that type of Van Halen harmony stuff. But without Ted's input. Without his input.
So, but I love that combination of Ed and Mike together was just beautiful. Just beautiful. Yeah. And something that I didn't even think of this, and my friends at the podcast and the podcast will rock. You were on there recently. You were a guest, and they did Dreams, and they pointed out the fact that, like, do you notice that there's no harmonies on that? I was like, oh yeah, which is so strange because they would utilize those harmonies wherever they could. I never thought about that, but that's what I miss. It just, Ed and Mike together just made this such a unit. Right. It's like blending two paint colors together and coming up with a whole new color.
Yeah, if you ever get a chance to interview Mick Jones, I'd be interested to ask him. Like, that was, when Ed talks about that record, he typically says Mick had the biggest influence on Dreams, that Mick helped rearrange that song and worked with Sammy on that vocal. It'd be interesting to hear if ask Mick, like, when you listen back to the song, that sort of had the harmonies. Were there any thoughts about putting a harmony? I'm not sure what it would necessarily fit, but like, you're exactly right. There's like sort of like, it's interesting because it's such a Van Halen pop staple in some ways, but it doesn't have that Van Halen harmony vocal.
Dave's current status, interesting. Some question marks there. At one point, he had us thinking he wasn't going to be around for long. I mean, it was like that grim retirement announcement early. Well, I was actually a year ago. I think he did that. Around a year ago now. And he said, that's it. My handlers or my doctors or whatever said, I can't tour anymore. It's detrimental to my health. So
right.
Most recently, he's been releasing these recordings of the Van Halen classics from May with his current solo band. What do you think of those recordings?
It's you never know with these things, with to read into them or not read into them. The exact timing is escaping me, but I feel like the first song dropped right before the Wembley show, like 2 days before the Wembley show. And so, that was in the wake of the Wolfgang interview where I think it was with Rolling Stone, where he was, he didn't quite come out and say everything, but he sort of said enough where you sort of got the implication that there were roadblocks in the way of giving an Eddie Van Halen tribute, and it wasn't his uncle. And so you sort of left with, well, probably not Sammy, since Sammy seems like he'd be gung-ho to do this in a heartbeat. Like, probably not Mike.
It ain't Mike.
So you're kind of left with like, oh, it's got to be right. It ain't Mike. It ain't Sammy. Whatever, whatever disagreements Alex and Sammy might have, which probably are real. They probably are probably not. I would say probably the best buddies from what you sort of can kind of gather, basically, with Sammy saying Alex doesn't call me or whatever it is, right? But you think that if like Alex did call Sammy and says, I want to do this, that you have to believe that Sammy would be like, okay, let's do it. And so then you're left with this sort of like thing where it's like, oh, this thing came out, this song. I don't remember what the first one that came out. I don't know. I mean, Dave may just be wanting to keep his name out there. Like, hey, I got a great band. I want to play. I miss playing. I want to keep my name out here. So what? I'm going to re-record these songs and put them out. People will enjoy them or not enjoy them. But David Lee Roth back in circulation when I do this, so to speak. But I just kept thinking, like, I'm wondering if he's like saying like, oh, people say I can't sing anymore. People say I don't want to do this tribute show. I'm ready. I'm ready. I don't know what people were saying. I'm at the studio. I'm working every day. I'm like, let's go. Let's get this thing done. Now, I just thought the timing it could be a total coincidence, but I just saw that and I was like, it came out right before the Wembley thing. And I just thought, because look, I don't know the first thing about how they selected who was going to play at the Taylor thing. I know nothing, right? I'm just some guy who sitting here in Oklahoma who just watches things on the internet and reads books or whatever I do, reads articles on the internet. But the absence of David Lee Roth, considering he had played with the Foo Fighters in the past, and sort of like we all know that Taylor was an obsessive Van Halen fan and particularly seemed to be a David Lee Roth first guy. The fact that Dave wasn't asked to participate, that to me was, I don't know. Sammy didn't participate either. I get it. Mike didn't participate. Alex didn't participate. But like, that's just sort of, struck me that I would have to believe if Dave was asked, he would have participated. And yet that didn't happen. And I'm just wondering like where that sits with Dave. And maybe he doesn't care at all, but I suspect that was probably something that probably stuck in his craw. Just again, pure speculation. That's just me thinking about it. Considering he'd already played with those guys, considering the sort of like the absolute front to back superstar status of who played there. Certainly David Lee Roth as a name and as a career talent fit on that bill. Geezer Butler, Geddy Lee, go down the list of all the different people we could kind of point to say like the Pretenders, like all these people, like David Lee Roth would have been right in that universe of people who could have been in that show. But Dave was not, presumably, I don't know that, presumably was not asked to participate. And I just wonder if that was part of what was about the sort of like the re-recording, whether or not that had to do with the re-recordings, I don't know, but just sort of the timing. That's my big hot take. We put that up in Blabbermouth tomorrow.
There you go. Yeah.
Right. I'm just, again, this is a joke, everybody. We're like, Wolfie won't sing Panama, but I'll sing Panama.
Right.
This is a joke. It's a joke, right?
Yeah.
I'm just joking. So
what do you think of the songs that Dave put together, the California session songs? It's got a handful of those.
Right. I mean, I think for me, I found it frustrating. Not that the songs came out, but they came out so late in the game in terms of what we all knew. Like we knew John Five. I'm a huge fan. I've seen John Five with Rob Zombie twice. Love him. Love how much he loves Van Halen. So when John Five had been saying for, I mean, close to a decade that these songs are done and we're doing these songs and Greg Bissonette played on them and they sound like original Van Halen, and then they come out and it's just like, I felt like it was like all the joy sort of, I don't know how to explain, maybe I shouldn't have felt that way. I liked the song, especially the sort of the Van Halen tribute song that came out. I liked that and I enjoyed hearing it. I thought it was actually cool because it wasn't like a traditional Van Halen inspired song, right? It didn't sound like oh, they're trying to imitate. I'm just making it like imitate Unchained or something, which it wasn't anything like that. But for me, it was like I don't know, sort of like the air kind of got let out of the balloon for me. Maybe other people felt differently, but it's like you wait so long and you're like waiting for this year after year after year. Now it's like it comes out, it's like okay, Van Halen's over now as a band, and I get it. Meaning that I believe that most likely it was put on the shelf because Dave was an active member of Van Halen and didn't want to, I don't know, be like, basically put out the message that I'm a solo artist too, or whatever. Like he was 100% in on Van Halen. I respect that.
07 was when they recorded. Yeah.
Is that when they recorded?
I believe so. Let me just see here.
God.
I'm going to go to the VH.
Yeah, I'm not quoting you. I mean, it was at the end of the day, it was at least 10 years ago, at least. Yeah. And so that was the thing. It's like, for me, that was a big, I don't know. It just felt like
John Five. He told VHND early 07. He and Dave joined forces in the studio, recorded a batch of songs for a possible album, along with Dave's former solo bandmates, Greg Bissonette, and the late Brett Tuggle. Rest in peace, Brett Tuggle. We just
rest in peace. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. It's like I would have in an alternate universe, but didn't hear like what Ed had to say about it. Like someone said, like, "Hey, did you hear the new John Five Dave song?" And whatever he could have said that was, it's just like Ed had passed, and it's just sort of like I don't know. It just feels like
Well, he goes with the single at a time approach. Yeah, I remember he told Joe Rogan that. Dave said, I don't think I want to do an album in full anymore. I'm going to do one song at a time, which is what he's doing. And Sammy is still going to the album approach. I don't know what's right or wrong. It's all preference. But yeah.
I mean, I think in something like that, I think something like that probably would have been, there could have been a thought of you could do that as an EP or something. You could have put something out as a coherent thing, and except it just sort of, and again, just showed up one day on the internet. It was just like, here it is, it's like, and so I don't, again, it's like whatever the strategy is with that stuff. But for me, and I understand it wasn't just probably a matter of Dave didn't want to put it out, but at some point it's sort of like, these are 15-year-old recordings, and it's hard for me to get jazzed about that when I've been waiting for this for so long. It's sort of, I don't know. Maybe other people feel differently. Maybe we're like, oh, they're so excited it's out, it came out. But that was just sort of for me, it's just sort of anticlimactic, right?
I hear you. Yeah. I mean, I liked the song, Pointing at the Moon. I really, it's like Pink Floyd is speaking of Roger Waters. Starts off with that piano intro, and then Nothing Could Have Stopped Us Back Then Anyway is the one you were talking about. And I think Dave's voice sounds great on these tracks. Somewhere Over the Rainbow Bar and Grill. I just think they're different than, they're more of in the vein of Damn Good or Secrets or Women in Love.
Right.
There's the mellow side of Dave. The song that Dave did that they thought about putting on the first album, never did, was Angel Eyes. That demo, Angel Eyes. And that's just Dave and his guitar. But I just Dave's a mystery.
That's just where I'm at with it.
I think he likes that. He likes being somewhat of a mystery.
I did hear at some point with a little tidbit, which may or may not be semi-public knowledge. I don't remember. I don't think it's any sort of trade secret or anything. But I heard that at some point that Dave presented some of those songs to the Van Halen band as possible use for to spur along the songwriting process after a different kind of truth. It's basically I have this backlog of material, and for the story I was told, which again may not be 100% accurate, so take it as just sort of a whisper that someone told me, that it was that basically that the band, the other guys in the band kind of took a pass, and I think probably didn't want it to be using other people's songs to be, but basically that was an idea that was we have John Five and I wrote these songs, this is a starting point to start on working on other songs. Maybe we can, for another record, maybe we could do that. And I guess, I don't know. Yeah.
Just recently, Sammy was in the news for telling Rolling Stone he's up for the tribute. He does 10 songs. Dave does 10 songs. Actually, I think the order was Dave sings 10 songs, then I do 10 songs. I think he's still going back to that O2 tour.
Right.
You start, I'll finish. I love it. It's
Right.
just so funny between the back and forth. But he says that he would do it. Then you mentioned like, who's holding it up. What does it matter at this point? The fact of the matter is it's not going forward. It doesn't look like it's going to happen. But if it did, what would you like to see? Would you like to see it done like the Taylor Hawkins, the way that was done?
Well, I think when Wolfgang said that the other day, it sounded like he was like, yeah, I don't think, like, it sounded like he was like saying it's not going to happen probably, and I'm okay with it not happening. That's what I thought. I was actually sad. I think a little bit sad for him, but also happy for him, if that makes sense. I'm sad because I suspect again, I have no idea. I suspect on some level he really wanted it to happen, probably was invested at one point in trying to make it happen. At some point, it just becomes like such a frustration and just an aggravation or whatever it is. Just like you just sort of check out and you're just like, you know what? It's okay. I'm done. I'm like over it, right? I'm over it. And for me as a fan, I don't know how other people feel about that. I feel like the Taylor Hawkins shows were very emotional for me as a fan watching that. And then Wolfgang is right. I mean, I really did agree with him that he paid tribute to his dad. They paid tribute to Taylor, and it was fantastic. I thought it was just, it wasn't like no one came out and like waved an Eddie Van Halen flag or like, it was just, they just came out and just did their thing. And like, it was like, boom, it was great. And I thought it was just so to the point, which was like the songs, the music that speaks for themselves. This is what my father, Wolf, and all these other guys who love Van Halen, this is what we're paying tribute to. Taylor loved this band. We want to make sure we do this right. And I thought it was great. That said, if we wake up tomorrow and there's like 100, someone's done 180, and like Irving Azoff is like kind of put this thing together and waved his magic wand, and we have this thing coming out, I could say that it would be absolutely fantastic, to sort of bring out like, Jeff Beck, Eric Clapton, bring out the old, I'm old too, old geezers like Jeff Beck, Eric Clapton, bring out Jimmy Page and see if they would do it. I suspect that you could probably get those guys to do it, to pay tribute to Ed, I suspect, and then have a younger generation. But I thought, I think like if you were to do it, that would be amazing to have like the guys basically that Ed grew up on, who are still walking the earth. The three guys, who are sort of like the trio of the great guys other than Hendrix were still alive.
About that. How about that for a 2-show idea? One show with all
like have them come out and like whatever
inspired Eddie, and then the next one is all the ones that
they wouldn't
Eddie
have to come
inspired.
out and play like Van Halen songs, but I would I would think it'd be incredible to like have like Alex play with like a song with Jimmy Page, have him play a song with Eric Clapton, have him play a song with Jeff Beck, just have them do like one song, and that's all Alex wants to do. You just that would be, especially Alex being like the Zeppelin fanatic, the absolute, like that was like the be all end all for him.
Yeah.
I thought that would be like such an incredible tribute. And then you could have, the rotating other guys. It's sort of like, and again, I'm sure Alex would have other, sort of like absolute pinnacle artists that maybe he would think he would want to come out and play. Again, it's the type of thing that's really, as a Van Halen fan, and you get this, it's like, you ask Elton John, he's going to do it probably. I mean, like, unless he's got something else going on, he's like, would you play? I'm sure he'd be like, I'd be honored to play. It's the thing. It's like, it's such a, it's something that we sort of like all take for granted. I think as Van Halen fans, we don't think about it, but it's obviously like true that this guy transcends our little Van Halen universe that we think about as fans, as super fans or whatever. Like he transcends that, like Axl Rose. I'm just throwing a Carrie Underwood, just throw whoever you want to do, Garth Brooks. All these people would be like, sure, of course, they'd all do it, right? They'd all do it. Like it'd be the same thing with the Taylor thing, right? People would just kind of come and gather. And
Billy Joel, I could see doing it.
Right, of course, exactly. And they don't have to play Van Halen songs, right? I mean, whatever it is. I mean, however it would work it out to sort of have like, maybe they just used to do, I don't know, like whatever it would be that Alex, and then you could have Sammy and Dave and the rest of the show there. But I would think it would be like a more of a global, like sort of like Eddie Van Halen tribute rather than sort of like drilling down to be like, it's got to be like heavy in the Van Halen catalog. I mean, yeah, you should do Van Halen songs, but to me, it would be much more interesting to sort of have like, you know what, this guy, Jimmy Page, Ed grew up playing his riffs. Alex grew up obsessed with John Bonham and Led Zeppelin, and Jimmy Page, who doesn't play anymore, he's going to come on stage and he's going to play rock and roll with Alex or something, just as tribute to Eddie. Like, that would be like,
sure.
Jeff Beck's going to come out and they're going to do like Superstition, like those guys used to do in the clubs or whatever. That would be like, to me, you have to think it's kind of, obviously don't want to sound too weird about this, but like, something like that Eddie might be like, wow, that's kind of cool. Jeff Beck did Superstition with my brother. We used to play that in the clubs. Or like, wow, they had rock and roll and like, whatever. Like that sort of thing you would think like of all the things, like as a tribute, you might sort of some sort of spiritual way sort of like get that. But it's like, it's meant to be like, you know what, kid, you meaning Eddie, you grew up to be this guitar player that changed the world. You know what? We, as the giants who influenced you, we're going to come and say, you know what? Thank you for what you did for rock guitar. We appreciate you. We're going to pay tribute to you now. Like, just like you, like, you know, basically took our stuff and like ran with it and stuff. And I think that would be very, very powerful. And for rock guitar, I think it would be a great, great moment. I get Tony Iommi, right? I know, again, that's the other person I should have thought, like Tony Iommi. Tony Iommi there to play something with Alex. You know, that would be Brian May. Like, those
Brian
five
May,
guys.
absolutely.
Right, Brian May, Iommi, and the three other guys. I mean, these guys are like, you're not going to be with us that much longer.
No.
I don't mean it sounds morbid, but like they're definitely, you know, we're all mortal. And this would be like an incredible thing to look back on and go, wow, we actually got these guys on stage together one last time to pay tribute to Eddie Van Halen. That's my idea. That's my idea. Like, and of course, it's like, this is the most ludicrous thing you could ever come up with, probably. But that's what
you know what? Because you got me thinking now, because I just kept thinking there's no way it's going to happen, because this is my feeling is that
probably not, right?
Well, I mean, my feeling is that Dave just doesn't want to deal with Sammy. I don't think he wants Sammy to be a part of it. That's just my guess, okay? But let's just say that that's the main issue, right? So having two shows would solve the issue. Have one tribute show with Dave, one tribute show. So you're laughing.
No, I'm laughing because I love it. I love it.
I'm
not laughing at you. I'm laughing. No, I love it. I'm not laughing at you. I love it. I'm going to say something too.
But yeah, have them one and one. So that way they can have their fun and they don't have to deal with each other.
Right.
They don't have to share
different coats,
share dressing rooms,
different coats, different continents.
Yeah, right.
Right.
What do you think?
Like I was laughing. I was laughing because I was thinking about Sammy's comment about the plywood wall. Like he made it in Rolling Stone. He said they built a plywood wall. I was just thinking, like, we don't. I was like, we don't need to have different shows. You just need to have a giant plywood wall. God. And like this Dave's half of the stage, and this is Sammy's half of the stage. That's why I was laughing.
It's so funny. No, I think it's just so funny because it's like we're hoping and praying. It's like, well, maybe if they try this. But I love the documentary on the O2 tour when Sam was like. Every night we go knocking on Dave's doors, you know, and they show Sam. He's like, let's go see if Diamond's ready. He called him Diamond. He's like, knock on that door, you know, and he's not coming out. You know, it's so funny. And like Dave would just completely ignore him. And, oh my God.
Yeah. Rhino Records. We need like an MTV. We need an HD like re-release for that. We need that needs to be like put in theaters. Like,
oh my God. And then Dave's by his pool. And Dave's by his pool. He says, he says, Sam throws a party. I am the party. I love it.
I forgot about that. I gotta go see. I hope that's on YouTube.
That's on YouTube.
I'm not. I gotta. Okay, it's still good.
I love that.
It's so good.
It's just, and as Sammy's talking about how impossible Dave is to deal with, they're showing clips of Dave just like, you know, all that cocky strut going on stage, and just not giving two shits.
Right.
So let's wrap up now. So future, what would you? We got guys like Roger Waters, 79, Paul McCartney, and Springsteen. These guys who are still going. So I think Sammy very easily could go another 5 years full time, 10. I mean, who knows? This guy is like insane. You know, he just keeps going, and that's great because I'm a Sammy fan, and that keeps Mike going, and I love Mike. So, and by the way, I saw them play in Connecticut. Great show. So what do you see with Sammy in the future? What do you see in Dave's future? Because that's a question mark, as we talked about. What would you like to see from both of these guys in the next 5 years, 10 years, God willing?
Yeah. I mean, right. I mean, I think, you know, the whole way that the Dave's residency in Vegas sort of like got shut down because of COVID, it's like twice, and sort of the whole thing, you know, I maybe third time be a charm. I mean, it's hard for me to imagine these guys want to do a tour anymore, unless it would be like something. I have trouble believing that David Lee Roth's going to get on a bus and tour, and that's not a shot at Dave. It's just like the reality is like you're of a certain age. You say, you know what, I'm going to go to Vegas and I'm going to play. And
one show a month. How about one show a month?
Like whatever. Right. Or like exactly. And so to me, I still have to believe that's going to happen. If I learned anything from writing Van Halen Rising, it was that David Lee Roth lived for the stage. He lives for it. That's what he lives for. And he hasn't been on the stage in a long time. And so I have trouble believing that he's sort of like ready to wrap it up altogether, especially since he's really releasing these songs and doing his thing. You know, so I would have to think that he has a band. These guys are good musicians who can play the shit out of those songs, as we know. Al Strada, great guitar player. And I have to believe that he's going to take another shot at that and doing that. I don't know. I mean, I'm a little bit surprised that he hasn't said like, whatever, that we're going to do it at Christmas or New Year's this year. Like that would seem to me this would be the time to announce it if it's going to happen, because I would think that he would want to do that, just because that's who he is, right? That's who he is, and sort of especially having basically shut down twice. And so, in the terms of
you had in your book, he told his friends, "I don't want to be a rock star. I'm going to be a rock star."
Yeah, exactly.
It's who he is.
Right. Exactly. And, turning our attentions to Sammy's living his best life. I mean, I say that with all the greatest respect for him. Like he said it a couple of times, it's like, I don't have to make money for my music. The rest of the things I do, fund my music. So, it's like, I'm sure he's not going broke going on tour, but I'm sure he's like, at the end of the day, this is fun. I'm going to go do this. And I can, and for him too, what's great about what he does is he has his liquor brands and he has his other interests, and he can like advertise the shit out of that stuff. Yeah, I think he doesn't look like he's anywhere near stopping, and it's fun. It really is fun for us as fans, because he just, yeah. Whatever I think about Sammy, it puts a smile on my face. And there's a lot of people who get angry about Sammy or whatever. It's like, it's like I'm like he's the man. Like there he is. Like he's doing his thing, and like he's out there having fun. I'll tell you one funny story. I don't think Ted will mind me telling this story. I think is that Sammy called Ted at some point. I don't know. This could have been 18 months ago. I don't remember when I heard the story from Ted, and it's not. It's just, it doesn't matter. But like Sammy called and was like, "Hey Ted," left Ted a message like, "Hey, I'm up at 36,000 feet. We're flying. Wish you were there. Too bad you're not here. Whatever. We're flying this place." He called him from the plane, right? And Ted was like, "Can you believe it? Sammy called me from his plane." Basically like. Ted.
He's
Ted
still
was
like a kid.
He's living his best life. Like, right, exactly. Like he was like, Ted was really tickled by that. Like, I don't. Like, he just like, "I'm on my plane and we're flying here. Wish you were with us, buddy. Talk to you soon." That type of thing. That
he's
so it was
like genuinely happy guy for overall.
Right, exactly.
Just a happy dude.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And that was what Ted's whole point was. He just like loved that moment, like that Sammy was enjoying his success and having fun, and like they would call him and like think of him like when they were like flying to some gig or whatever, like just leave him a message. He thought that was great. He loved it. And look, I would say too, like in kind of closing, like I know a lot, I'm sure you saw too on social media, there were a lot of people who were very disappointed that Dave canceled the shows. And I don't mean that to like take a shot at Dave. I just mean like that there were people who wanted to go to these shows and were seriously bummed that they weren't going to get to see Dave and wanted to see the shows. I had to pay, flown there, like, obviously, flown from across the country. And so I hope that happens again, because it's those same people are going to want to be there. They love Roth. They love the whole lineage of Van Halen and what he brings as an entertainer and as a figure that's towers above the sort of just about music, just as a pop culture figure. And so I really do hope that he does do shows, that he does do that. We haven't heard anything about that, and I've heard nothing about that happening. I'm just saying I hope that happens.
Well, happy birthday to both guys, Diamond Dave,
yes, definitely,
and the Red Rocker. Van Halen Rising, How a Southern California Backyard Party Band Saved Heavy Metal is one book. Ted Templeman, A Platinum Producer's Life in Music is the other. They've been out for a while. Everybody knows about the books, Greg. I don't need to plug them, but every Van Halen fan, if they don't own it already, they should own both of them. And where can people find you online if they want it? And you're active. I'm on your Twitter.
Yeah, Facebook. Yeah, at Greg Renoff Twitter. That's what I do. I actually, pretty. I'm like, sort of the distributor for all Van Halen memes and whatever, license plates and all the stuff and whatever else. We just chat and just hoping some cool news. Hope it happens soon with something related to stuff. Wolfgang's album's going to come out. We're recording it now. That'll be the next probably big ticket thing we'll get focused on. That was great. Saw some shows last year. Loved it. Can't wait to see him again.
All right, Greg. Thanks so much, man. This was awesome.
My pleasure.
And thank you for listening. I'm Eric Senich. Make sure you check out the website bookedonrock.com and subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Join me again next time for another brand new episode of Booked on Rock.
Well, that was an adventure.
That was quite a show you put on today.
Well, let me just close this conversation by saying you are one unique individual.